Welcome to Common Man Cocktails. I'm your host, Derek Shore, and today we're going to show you how to make the Manhattan. We're going to do, there's going to be a rant. I'm going to have a little rant about the best Manhattan. I'm going to show you some variations. I'm going to show you some cost breakdowns. All the things you need to kind of better understand how to make this highly classic, probably most in-demand cocktail on the planet. Also, I apologize for my lighting. It's probably going to look a little weird. My studio light, it finally died after 14 years, and so luckily I built my studio with actual daylight lights on the ceiling so I can kind of just compensate, but it might be a little weird looking, so that's why. This drink is going to be, here's the recipe, it's going to be 2 ounces of bourbon or rye, traditional rye, newer age, I guess you could use bourbon. We'll explain a little bit in a minute. 1 ounce of sweet vermouth, 2 dashes of Angostura bitters, and we're going to use a maraschino cherry. You could use a lemon peel if you want to. I'm going to up the game a little bit because awesomedrinks.com, if you want to buy yourself some Luxardo maraschino cherries, best cherries on the planet. You can sit down and eat these as a snack. I don't recommend it. You're probably going to get a sugar high. But recipe that I'm going to break this down with, I'm using Carpano Antica because that's what I have, or Antica Formula, whatever. Carpano, bad eyes. We're going to use a bullet bourbon primarily because this is kind of your de facto standard bourbon, barrel strength, uncut, limited bottling. I probably paid more than what I'm going to talk about for this, but that's what we got. Angostura bitters. You can use your favorite bitters and our cherries. So the drink, I'm going to build this thing and explain some of the pricing and how we got to it. Building this drink is simple. You need a mixer, again, awesomedrinks.com. You need a jigger, again, you know where to go. Pour it unstrained into a chilled coupe glass. I have sitting here with ice and water to chill it up because there's not going to be any ice in this. If I make it at home when I'm watching Star Trek, I just use a old-fashioned glass with some ice in it, and we call it good. But whatever. We're going to do this traditional among the YouTubes. So we're going to start with 2 ounces of bourbon. I estimate your bourbon is going to cost you between $25.99 and $30 if you're in the United States in a reasonable place where you're not paying absorbent amounts of taxes. So let's just do the 2 ounces here. If you want to, you can use cheaper bourbon. You can use better bourbon. But for the sheer fact that I'm calling this and costing this in at approximately $2.86, the one I have here is probably more like $3.58. But if you're making it at home and you use Martini Rossi, kind of a classic sweet vermouth, then you're going to come in at about the $2.86. I'm using Carpano Antica. Dramatic difference in pricing. On a per cocktail basis, not so bad. But if you're going to pay up front, this is going to cost you, this is a small bottle, but $7.50, I believe, was like $26. And the Martini and Rossi is like $9. So, you know, half the price. No, that's not even half the price. It's less than half the price. So, you know, people like their sweet vermouths. I'm not a huge fan. You could give it to me either case. Either way, I'm fine with it. And I'm going to explain to you how I make these at home. I don't do it this way, but I do use the same ratios. 2 dashes of Ongo. And so that's 2 milliliters. 1, 2. So average bottle of Angostura, you're looking at about 4 ounces. When you break it out on a per milliliter basis, since 1 dash is a milliliter, it comes out to about 10 cents a dash or whatnot. That's already factored into this $2.86. I didn't factor in the cost of ice. I didn't factor in the cost of your glasses, your barware, and I didn't factor in the cost of your cherries because that's really hard. Now, you can change this, and this is going to be where we discuss. By the way, I'm gonna stir this for like 30 seconds. You can do it for a minute if you've got patience. And if you find stirring hard, I have videos. I'll put a link in the description in case you're not on YouTube and you're on. I publish on Rumble now. I've always published on Facebook, so I put them out there too. But if you'd like to be one of the first 12 followers on Rumble, there's that. So, nice and cold. You see the kind of the little condensation. You're good to go. Dump your water. Take your drink. Get a julep strainer again. Awesomedrinks.com. Strain this into here. Gonna put a cherry on there. As we discuss, here's the question for you. You could think about this while we're doing this and doing the tasting. Where and how do you get your how do you get the best Manhattan? Is there a restaurant you go to? A person that makes it that just makes the best one? And that's a loaded question because I think it's a bunch of bullshit. But we'll talk about that in a second. Let's give this a taste. There goes my pump. It's good. It's okay. My primary contention with this is primarily just the vermouth. It's sweet, so it's got that like sweet and a little bit of that bourbon flavor to it. It's not as strong. It's got a little bit of a boozy kind of like wine, fortified wine flavor kind of in the finish. A little bit of that cherry, I think, some of that rubbed off. A little brown sugar. You could use a rye. It's going to be maybe less sweet because the difference between picking, say, a rye and like bullet rye. Okay, mayhaps I drank my bullet rye finally. This is really getting old and weird. I think something spilled on it. This is a Knob Creek rye. You could do this as 100 proof. I would go with a higher proof in this specific thing. This is probably about 100 proof. 60%. Oh, yeah, 120. There's probably a little bit more. But the rye is going to give you a little spiciness. It's going to lose some of the sweetness. I like kind of the sweet bourbon flavor a little bit, but I could go either way. If you're making Manhattans, what I would say is try different combinations, not just to experiment, but because it gives you kind of get bored of one specific flavor. You could try different bourbons, you could try different ryes, combine them together, try different vermouths. So that brings me to some of the variations first. Let's go through the variations. So when I make this, I leave out the vermouth entirely. So you're not going to get as much sweet. You're going to get, instead, I typically will use like an Amaro Nino, which is high proof, so it gets a little bit more boozy and heavy. Had like 3 of these last Friday. It was a good time. Tried it with different types of bourbon, primarily, and the difference was quite dramatic, just sticking with the Nonino in there. When you do this as an Amaro Manhattan, is what it would traditionally be called, I guess, you're going to do the same ratios. It's 2 ounces of bourbon, 1 ounce of Amaro. I do 2 ounces of orange bitters and then 1 ounce of Angostura bitters to kind of bring in a little bit of that citrusy action. If you don't have Amaro Nonino, you could try a little Montenegro. I find this to be a little tamer on the Amaro side, so it's not necessarily has much bitter to it. Not as potent, maybe a little bit more sweet, so it brings in some of that sweet vermouth sweetness without the vermouth. Luxardo Bitter Bianco, you could use that. That's it's gonna be a little bit more bitter, maybe more like a Campari or Chinar. You could use a Verna for a black Manhattan. Give it more of the coffee-esque appeal to it, the heavier body to it, and it's a darker product. So that's how I typically bring in some of the changes. I'm not a huge vermouth fan, although this is perfectly fine, and I think that the bourbon shines a little bit better with the Amaro, and that might also have to do the difference between the Amaro, the sweet vermouth. So like a Martini and Rossi is probably going to be lighter, considering it's $8.99. The complexities and the flavors are going to be less. If you go to a restaurant and you order a Manhattan, at least in Boston, I found most of the recipes in general are going to run you, cocktail recipes that is, going to run you between $15 and $18. If you're looking for a really good Manhattan, I'm going to guess probably $18 to $22, and that's the variation isn't necessarily just going to be the place, but it's going to be the bourbon selection. And typically when you order a Manhattan, they ask you, if you're at a good place, which bourbon do you want? Or which rye do you want? And then you get to select, and you ask them, well, what do you got? And they give you a listing, and you pick your favorite, and they charge you a big pile of money for it. So then what makes the best Manhattan? And this is why that's a bunch of bullshit type of question. Because a Manhattan is 2 ounces of bourbon and 1 ounce of vermouth. So ingredients make the best product. If you pick this bourbon, it's going to cost you probably $30. If you, maybe a little less, maybe a little bit more. To me, when I was making my Manhattans, I was using Barrel last week. I wasn't specifically using this one, but this is Barrel Craft Spirits Dovetail, finish in rum port barrels and Cabernet barrels, bottle 5,488. This is a $250 bottle of bourbon. It's a cask strength, so we're looking at 131 proof, right? I took this from the upstairs bar. This is my wife's product. She's into bourbons, right? So if you're gonna spend $250 on a bottle of bourbon and you're put it in your drink, it's kind of insane, but you could do that. and you should have a good Manhattan. So you take your $30 and you replace it with $250. Even when you do the math out, it's probably still cheaper than going to a bar. You use a high-end Amaro, you're gonna get a better product. But outside of that, I cannot make this drink any more or less better than another individual unless I entirely fuck it up and just don't do the right recipe, don't do the ratios correctly, don't stir it with enough ice or too much ice or too little ice. Other than that, maybe I use a different cherry. I don't know. How do you make the product that is a 2-part to 1-part product that much better than the other guy? You give this recipe to somebody, you give these products to somebody at Buffalo Wild Wings, they should be able to make you a Manhattan just as good as that bar in downtown Boston, the Wink and Nods or the whatever it is, and it should taste the same. The environment changes, but sure, other than that, it should be the same. Prove me wrong. Give me an example what makes one better than the other if you're choosing the exact same 2 ingredients. I don't think it's going to happen. Leave your comments below. So go home, build yourself a $2.86 cocktail, a Manhattan, classic style, like they did it in the 1900s, in the early 1900s, and save yourself a boatload of money from going to the big cities where you could get the same cocktail, probably with cheaper ingredients, and spend over 2 times more. We're teaching you how to drink.